The Democratic National Convention wasn't very good as a piece of television. I don't think that's a particularly controversial take. If we've learned anything over the past 5 months, it's that virtual things are pale imitations of their in-person counterparts. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about the coverage of the DNC, specifically partisan coverage from either side. Welcome to Political Therapist, a channel devoted to examining the role of emotions in shaping our political views. Today, I'd like to examine two different interpretations of the Democratic National Convention. One from the left, one from the right. And I have a simple question in mind. How do two different people, or two different groups of people, watch the same convention and come away with completely different views, not just about whether it was good or whether they agreed with the rhetoric or policy, but about what was actually being said? So I'd like to look at the difference between the coverage of the DNC on The Ben Shapiro Show, hosted by Ben Shapiro, and on the Hill TV's Rising, specifically the coverage by Krystal Ball, one of the anchors. Shapiro is saying that the Democratic Party is being controlled by radical leftists like Bernie Sanders. Krystal is saying that the Democratic Party is basically centrist, and it's pandering to centrists. For the moment, I'd like you to forget about which narrative you agree with. And so, the story of these two disparate tales begins with emphasis. Shapiro started his show before talking about any of the primetime DNC stuff. He talked about the pre-primetime convention.
Primetime DNC is the dating photo, and all the stuff that happens earlier in the day at the DNC is the reality.
Shapiro played a clip of Tom Perez talking about the DNC platform and interpreted it this way.
Okay, so it was Bernie Sanders who's the driving force.
And he also played this clip from a Young Democrats conference.
This future that we all want, that we're all trying to build, really is about the destruction of colonization, white supremacy, and capitalism.
So already, Shapiro's putting emphasis on the left-wing nature of the Democratic Party. So the next step here is spin. Let's go back to Shapiro's take on that Tom Perez clip.
The platform is a bold document. It's both inspirational and aspirational. The input from Senator Sanders and others was invaluable to putting that together.
Notice that in the clip itself, Perez just says that Sanders helped write the Democratic platform. But Shapiro spins it as,
So it was Bernie Sanders who's the driving force.
It could just as easily be spun as Perez trying to throw a bone to the left wing of the party by saying Bernie's name. Or someone could spin it as, the pre-primetime show is less important, therefore, this is where they relegate the discussions of capitalism and Bernie's input in the platform to. Now here, we're just talking about Shapiro emphasizing evidence in a certain way. But spin also comes up when these two different pundits are talking about the literal same thing. Take a look at this clip from John Kasich.
I'm sure there are Republicans and independents who couldn't imagine crossing over to support a Democrat. They fear Joe may turn sharp left and leave them behind. I don't believe that, because I know the measure of the man. It's reasonable, faithful, respectful. And you know, no one pushes Joe around.
I don't believe in pure objectivity, but I can semi-objectively say that this is definitely different from some of the other messaging of the Democratic Party. It certainly contradicts what the AOC and Sanders wing of the party wants. Listen to the way Krystal Ball describes it.
Because the very act of inviting and featuring people like John Kasich is precisely intended to trash the wing of the party which AOC represents.
In order to spin this, Shapiro puts less emphasis on what Kasich is saying, and more emphasis on...
Well, he's fine. No one pushes him around. No one pushes him around. Quick cut to Bernie Sanders. So Bernie Sanders speaks at the convention last night, and he's like, by the way, you know who now runs this party? It's me. Me, a communist white man.
He does a comical Russian accent for Bernie and plays a clip of his speech.
So is that a bit of a conflicting message? John Kasich's like, they won't go radical, guys. They won't go radical. And I can assure you they won't go radical because I know Joe Biden and Joe Biden is not alive. And then Bernie's like, I can assure you, we definitely have gone radical. And you're going to have to get over it. I believe Bernie. Because Tom Perez said before the convention that Bernie wrote the convention.
Notice what Shapiro does here. He emphasizes something, he spins it, and when he runs into a contradiction, he justifies his spin with a fact he emphasized previously. Krystal describes it completely differently.
Like, hey, progressives, here's some things you're gonna get. You're gonna get some things on childcare. You're gonna get some progress on healthcare.
Part of this difference comes from different political perspectives. Bernie's speech looks moderate to Krystal, but extreme to Shapiro. The other part of it is spin. Here's another really small example of how spin works.
It was actually the only really policy-centric
Yeah, that's right. It actually was.
part.
This is a basically true generalization. But if we think about it in a spin brain,
Which makes sense because Bernie's supporters actually cared about the policy. That's why they were behind him, is because they cared about healthcare, because they cared about the environment.
for Krystal, Bernie's focus on policy is just another sign of how great he was and what a shame it was he lost. Now, think for a second about how Shapiro would portray this. Well, he didn't address this explicitly, but I'd guess he'd say that Bernie focused on policy because his policies are the policies that the Democratic Party is adopting. When Shapiro goes on his rant about how Bernie's policies have taken over the Democratic Party, it's not that that rant isn't grounded in evidence. It totally is. It's just grounded in the exact same evidence that Krystal Ball sees to show that Bernie's campaign was just really great. That is how two people can look at the same set of facts and draw different conclusions. Now, the final step of this spin process is extracting from this information. It starts with statements like these.
I mean, if I'm being perfectly honest, it was like tailor-made of a night to make people who have my politics just super depressed.
But people, especially pundits, also want to predict the future. And Shapiro and Krystal's visions of the future could not be more different.
The Youth Council is the future of the Democratic Party. So if you're wondering, the future of the Democratic Party, it looks a lot like AOC and not very much like Joe Biden.
Now, he doesn't call himself a Democrat yet, but it doesn't matter because his viewpoint is much more influential in the Democratic Party than millions of people who do call themselves Democrats and vote in Democratic primaries. They all represent a step forward on their multi-decade project to move the party from its working-class populist roots to a more upscale and affluent coalition of what they view as the educated and the cultured.
If you follow two different paths of spin, you end up in two completely different worlds, even if you're working on the same set of facts. Now, I'd like to clarify that this mechanism of finding different narratives in the same speech isn't some malicious and intentional dishonesty. Rather, I think we're naturally disposed to find narratives in what we watch. Part of the reason why people like Krystal and Shapiro have followings is because they create narratives that people resonate with. I'm pretty sure that our brains do some version of this emphasize, spin, extract process naturally, and that's not a bad thing. That process works for some things. So, what do emotions have to do with all this? After all, this is a channel about emotions. Our emotions are the reason this happens. If we were perfectly rational beings, we would pinpoint every single policy stance that the speaker took during the convention, then combine that data with information about the policy positions of every person that could possibly be in Congress, and create a probabilistic forecast of what policy could pass Congress. Then use that probabilistic forecast to determine who would benefit us more, Donald Trump or Joe Biden. But we're not perfectly rational beings, and I think that's a beautiful and remarkable thing. It just means that when we're watching the Democratic National Convention, it's a good idea to make sure the narratives we form are not only grounded in what's actually happening, but choose to respect the ambiguity of reality. Here's my personal spin on the DNC. The Democratic Party is a coalition of many different interest groups of many different affiliations. In the convention, they're choosing to emphasize the safest messaging. In reality, the left of the Democratic Party has some power, but not as much as the moderate wing. Now, is that narrative I just constructed completely true? No. Is it completely immune from this process I outlined in the video? No. But I hope that by looking at how two different people see two completely different things, I found something a little closer to the elusive truth.